Oftentimes, what I find myself saying to a parent who's worried about their child going to camp and saying, I'm not sure if he's ready. I think the question is more about, is the parent ready? And you spoke to that when you were talking about what is the parent worried about, and are they making their child worried about something that maybe isn't even on the child's radar? So that's really important. I think that asking the question to the kid, well, what is it? Oh, you're feeling nervous? Yeah, that's normal before you go to camp. What are you nervous about?
Yeah.
Because like you said, it probably is something completely different than what the parent is thinking. Usually it's one of those things you mentioned, kind of a logistical type of thing. Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. Besides the toddler years, I think it's the teen years that parents tend to think are going to be the hardest with their kids. But I really enjoy working with teens and parenting teens, and I found someone else who does as well. Her name is Helaina Altabef, and she has the website tametheteen.com. She offers parenting classes and coaching and all kinds of blog posts and information about building up the attributes we need to form strong, caring relationships with our teens. So I hope you enjoy my episode 92, which is my conversation with Helaina Altabef. Well, today on the podcast, I'm so excited to have a new guest. Her name is Helaina Altabef, and she has a website and coaching and classes called Tame the Teen. Welcome, Helaina.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. We had a phone chat a couple weeks ago and got to know each other, and seems like our philosophies are very much in line with one another's.
Yes, I think so.
So, Helaina, why don't you start by just telling a little bit about your background and how you got into this practice of coaching and offering classes specifically around parenting teens?
Sure. So I worked with teens for over 15 years. I love them. This is just the population I am meant to serve. I really understand them. And I also have access to their superpowers and gifts. And I just know that these years are also very tender years. And as adults, we forget just how crazy and tumultuous they are. And when teens have access to adults who get that, I think it's very powerful, and it makes an imprint on them. So I worked with teens for a long time, and then I became a parent, and I started to work with teens one-on-one. And then I realized that a lot of what was going on between parents and teens, though ostensibly parents called me to work with their teens, what was really going on was a lot of disconnection between parents and their kids. And I became like a liaison between the parents and the teens. And so I had this hypothesis of, what are we missing? Is there another way to approach the teen years that would create more connection and harmony and ultimately empower teens to launch into independent, capable adulthood? Because around the same time I was doing this, a lot of the bad press about millennials started happening. So I dug in and created some focus groups and did some market research for a year to see if what I was seeing was actually just a thing or a trend. And turns out this was, echoed across the board. And so much so that I started to see it written about in national newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. And it became apparent to me that whatever I had as a teacher that I could access teens successfully was teachable to their parents. Mm. And so that's what I set out to do, was to hone in on what are the attributes that a successful relationship to a teen looks like, and then, or has, and then how do we embed those in parents? And then Tame the Teen was born out of that mission.
Oh, Gosh, I have so many things that I want to follow up on from what you just said. Starting with, I loved how you talk about accessing their superpowers. I really believe in that too. I think sometimes we give teens especially kind of a bad rap. They have sort of like a bad reputation. They always have. It's not just this generation. It's when we were teenagers. Adults tend to say, oh, those teenagers, or, all this kind of negative talk. But like you, I've had so much experience working with teens, and they are fantastic. And this is what I think parents need to feel less fear about the ages. I don't know if that's, it's kind of like, I feel like it's the same way people working with horses. Sometimes it's like your anticipatory fear about something being hard actually makes it harder. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, you manifest. I think you create tension. And that's just not with teens, but in general, when you approach something with anxiety and fear, that word has become so much a part of the parenting experience. So what does it look like if we approach it differently? If we become aware that we're having that fearful approach? And it's hard because society is increasingly sending that message too. It's not just the individual, it's a collective experience. So how do we move beyond that and get in touch with ourselves enough to be able to create a different paradigm?
Yeah, definitely.
And I think, when you're in your own experience, and look, all we have when we're parents is our parents who are role models. That's where we learn, or ourselves. And if you have a kid who's nothing like you, how do you stay connected to that kid? How do you reach that person? So yeah, I hope to explore how to figure out how to do that most effectively.
So tell me a little bit, I'm just curious, what does your coaching look like? Like, what does that look like when a parent would call you to help them with their teen? Did you go to their home? Did the teen come to you? Or how did that all work?
So parents usually come to me when they are just like fed up, or this is the language around it. And it's so understandable. They feel this mix of frustration and worry. That's usually the cocktail. And they feel out of options and fed up, and that they've tried everything and they just like can't get through to their teens. And so it really, to me, sounds like a communication breakdown. And as a teacher, that's really the skill you hone more than anything, is how to communicate effectively. And so when I hear all of that, it leads me to understand, it prompts my curiosity about what kinds of situations, really, what are your triggers? If they're open really at all, because most parents, all parents want what's best for their kids. All parents want to be connected. But it's that thing of growth mindset that in their heads, they're like, I think I can change this. I think I can get through to my teen. I don't think this is who he is forever. And if they have that, then we're good. Mm-hmm. But if parents don't have that, I notice there's a lot of reluctance to that. Not all parents necessarily see it as an opportunity to grow as a human.
Yeah. Well, I love that. It's great that you are able to translate all that experience that you had. You were a middle school teacher. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. I know. That's like the big camp age too. So they are so much fun. It's just, yes, there's some awkwardness and there's just differences in maturity and so many things going on. And the energy and fun of that age is just the best. It's so great. What I really love is, I think maybe because you've set yourself up as a coach, you're not a therapist, no. You're not a doctor, you are a coach, someone who, it's like a parent going to, like I think of in yesteryear, it would have been going to, the neighbor down the street who has, 4 grown kids, who would sit down on the front porch and kind of talk you off the ledge and say, when boys are 14, this typically happens, this pulling back. And it's nothing about your relationship with him. It's, this will change as time goes on. This is a natural occurrence. I think that parents, in addition to the fear, have also gotten very isolated, thinking that perhaps their issues are only theirs, when, boy, we all know, those of us who work with kids or who have more than one kid ourselves, know that everybody has different struggles with their connection and communication with their kids at some point in their development.
I agree. I think as society has become increasingly isolated, again, we're fighting against, this is a mission for we're looking at a collective mission, right? To be able to sort of transcend the circumstances that have brought us here. Many of us don't have families nearby. We feel so encumbered with just the responsibilities of daily life. And daily life has become busier. That is like objectively true. And we have taken on more as a society in our day-to-day. We value busyness more. So without that community to help stay grounded and help you relate and help you realize it's not just you. You know, when I do these workshops and I sort of parrot the things that I've heard other people say, and there's this amazing moment where people let their guard down and everyone's nodding. And it's so wonderful because we all realize like we have so much more in common. And I think another attribute of this is there's so much guilt and, parent guilt and mom shaming. This is a new thing. That's just such an ugly part of the experience. The children should not be the things that how we measure our success as people. And I think it can easily become, it's not hard to see rather how that happens. Mm-hmm. And so again, to just sort of take that out of the room and take the judgment out of the room and really just open to the experience of like, these are just human beings. Who is sitting in front of you? What makes them tick? What are they actually saying? What are they actually doing? Mm. And when you remove all of those barriers, you get to know the person in front of you who you care about more than anyone.
Yeah. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners. I want to make sure you know about my brand new book, Happy Campers, 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. I wrote the book to share about all the experiences and things I've learned from working with thousands of kids, young adult counselors, and parents at summer camp over the past 34 summers. I've learned so much through my studies of psychology and well-being and been able to apply those both at summer camp and with my own family. And I'm really excited to share them with you in my book, Happy Campers. I'd love to invite you to pick up a copy of my book and join me this summer as we go through one secret per week, each week of July and August. For information about joining my summer read-along of Happy Campers, visit my website at happycampersbook.com. While you're there, click on the Book Hub link for tons of downloadable resources that go along with the book. Well, I want to ask you, we have a couple topics that we want to cover, but I just want to quickly ask what's your kind of go-to kind of first thing that you talk with parents about in terms of kind of overcoming the kind of the communication or connection block that they're having? Is there like a standard thing that seems to come up in a lot of your coaching talks?
Yeah, I think the first thing that helps parents is to give them context, because in my training as an educator and then as a coach, it became clear that one of the measures of what good coaching does is it takes you out of your perspective and offers another one. And so I try to support that with research about what is going on developmentally, neurologically, psychologically, physiologically that would account for certain behaviors. And once they start to see and try to really offer things, I like to say, from their corner. So what happens from what's going on in their corner that would explain some of the behaviors or miscommunications. And that seems to open up a whole window of opportunity, just to change.
Yes, I love that. Well, we first connected because you have gotten involved in the camp world doing some training are you training counselors or working with parents?
Yeah, training counselors.
Okay.
And also offering as a guest blogger for parents.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about how, this is the time of year where kids are going on all kinds of, especially teenagers, often are going on some kind of summer adventure away from home. It could be summer camp. It could be, a language program abroad. It could be a job in a different state. I don't know, just all different kinds of things that kids might be doing that can be stress inducing for those kids because it's something new. So let's talk about some of your strategies that you teach parents about helping with sort of pre-camp or pre-adventure jitters that is very typical of a lot of teens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of them is to start again from recognizing that there are two corners. You as the parent might have some anxiety about, because your kid's a little, if you're honest with yourself, your kid could be a little awkward or maybe has a hard time making friends or maybe has weird eating habits. So you might have some anxiety yourself. And to separate that, just to become aware of that so that you are not bringing to every conversation a reminder and drawing attention to all those, what we find as the educator, but not as the parent, the endearing quirks or idiosyncrasies that the kid might possess. Because chances are that child from his corner doesn't even know that he does all those things. So to separate from the child and to really see, just reckon and make sure whatever your anxieties are, to keep that stuff under control. And then from there, you can start to listen in for the child. Now, maybe your anxieties were the thing in the room. Maybe your kid doesn't have any anxiety and you're bringing it. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that the child has what is very normal stress. And that's a good stress, the jitters, But in our society, again, in this trend toward anxiety and fear, and there's research to support that this is a real problem. Anxiety among teens is on the rise and among adults. But not everything is anxiety. And so to not begin with anxiety, unless your child has been diagnosed with anxiety, but if your child hasn't been, then to help them understand that new experiences bring with them, it's normal to feel a mix of excitement and a little bit of fear about the unknown and some anticipation, and to speak with children in that way and presume that they're smart enough to understand that, because they will. But when you label everything under the blanket of anxiety, they just presume that all experience over time, children are excellent observers, but terrible interpreters. So they don't have the discernment to say, oh, now this is actually anxiety. It's not anxiety. It's just a little, this is new. Of course I feel this way. My mom has felt this way. My dad has felt this way. My siblings have felt this way. And to embolden them to do things even if they feel fearful.
Sure.
So I think that is those two things are just the start.
Yeah.
And then another one is to not make the statement of like, well, everybody loves camp. Everybody gets over it. To really hear if your kid is expressing their jitters, then to get in there with them and help them to make concrete the things that feel abstract. So understand what their jitters are about, really hear them out, and help them anticipate, well, what would you do if you're nervous about changing in front of everybody? What do you do if you don't feel well, or if you're homesick, or if you lose your toothbrush? Whatever it is, to walk through those and take them to heart without saying, oh, get over it, you'll get over it, everybody does. Because what you want to teach them is how to solve problems, not to just presume that they're going to come up with some answers. They might, but they're looking to you to help them as their first point person.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you just talk about normalizing that natural stress with anything new. I've been talking about that a lot lately, just when, to grow, you have to get a little bit outside your comfort zone. If we just stay doing the same thing forever, whether you're a kid, a teenager, an adult, you don't grow. So, but when you're growing, you feel stress. I still feel stress when I'm doing something that's, more outside my comfort zone, speaking in front of a really large group. I mean, I get jitters, it's a normal thing. And it gets better over time, but you still always have that if you're continuing to grow. And so I love how you mentioned sharing your own experiences as a parent when you had jitters, like maybe you studied abroad during college and, that was during a time when you couldn't even talk to your parents hardly ever. Maybe sharing how that felt and letting them know that it's normal to have that feeling and it's okay. And, I love that. And then the other piece that I really like, because I hear this a lot as a camp director, oftentimes, what I find myself saying to a parent who's worried about their child going to camp and saying, I'm not sure if he's ready. I think the question is more about, is the parent ready? And you spoke to that when you were talking about what is the parent worried about, and are they making their child worried about something that maybe isn't even on the child's radar? So that's really important. I think that asking the question to the kid, well, what is it? Oh, you're feeling nervous? Yeah, that's normal before you go to camp. What are you nervous about?
Yeah.
Because like you said, it probably is something completely different than what the parent is thinking. Usually it's one of those things you mentioned, kind of a logistical type of thing. Like what do I do when I get off the bus? Or things like that. Or what's going to be for breakfast? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that kids tend to be thinking about. Whereas the parent is thinking this global, like, oh my gosh, how will my child feel being away from me for a moment? So I really like that. And I'm so excited. I'll definitely link in the show notes to your post that outlines all these sort of kind of discussion points and thoughts for parents. But it's funny how we started when you were talking about the coaching, how so much of it comes to how we approach our child, whether it's camp or they're going through their teenage years. Isn't it interesting how it's all sort of that same thing of being aware of where we're coming from?
Yeah.
And not just it's not all about the kid. We're there too. We're like part of the relationship and we bring our own things to it. So if we felt something when we went to camp for the first time, we sometimes assume they're feeling the same thing, but they are their own person, and that's something different. Well, what other tips are you finding yourself, like maybe as you think about training the staff, what are you covering with the counselors that you're working with?
So this same camp asked me to do a workshop entitled How to Stay the Adult.
Yes.
And because I think it's tricky, right? Because you're putting people who are like 19, 20 years old, technically still in their adolescence. This is not me saying that. This is technically they're still in their adolescence. You're putting them in charge of like 14-year-olds. Okay, so there becomes perhaps this moment where the counselor knows that let's say like the queen bee of the bunk is doing something that's really not right, but the counselor wants the acceptance of the queen bee because she herself is a little close. So to help give her that sense of awareness that here's some dynamics that you might come across. Now, how can you respond? If you were in the peer group, you would respond one way. As the adult and the authority, let's play it out how you would respond in that way. And again, to basically do what we just said with the parents and the child, to give them some anticipatory information, to put it on their radar that they have a choice point in those moments, and to help them call back to the fact that I have to make the choice that the adult would make, even if it's not the choice that my peer version would make. And I'm going into this assuming that that will be something that they will be able to understand, even if they haven't thought in those terms before. And I think we'll do some stuff with boys, it's a very different dynamic. If boy counselors may possibly treat their, their campers like little brothers. So they'll haze them a little bit. And that's there's some of that in camp that's just part of camp culture, where that's the amazing thing about camp is when you are in charge of, the person in charge is just a stone's throw away from where you are, but that there are boundaries and limits. And so to make these boy counselors aware of what might be hurtful. How do you know if you cross a line? How do you repair it if you cross a line? What is very simple, clear language that you can use to ask, are you okay? Are you included? Are you feeling left out? And very, very simple and direct language. Not a lot of theory in all of this. This has to be 1 to 2 sentences of what I have on my website, go-to lines, that people can just memorize, really that get at the heart of the matter. And then from there, hopefully that they'll be able to implement that as the summer goes on.
That's so exciting. Well, I can't wait to follow up with you after your training and see how it goes. I do think that it's really great. The opportunity that these young men have specifically at camp is unbelievable. At my own camp, we've seen a complete transformation from the fraternity-esque feel to now this very much a lot of physical affection, hugging each other, boys who cry in front of each other around the campfire because they feel open to share what's really going on. It's really amazing because for many of these boys, summer camp, when they're away and with these role models, will be the first time they've experienced this. So, translate that to when you're training these staff, have them hopefully the leaders there can nurture that among the staff themselves. Females tend to be easier at this. We're kind of masters at connecting and crying and getting vulnerable. And it happens at camp. But for the boys, it's truly magical at camp. So I'm so excited.
You'll have to let me know if there are resources that you recommend that I can lean on during this for that exact topic of how do you give young men permission to be like a wholehearted individual. And this has never been a better time to embrace that, I believe. I think we're seeing a really big shift. But if you have resources that you have found successful, I would be really appreciative to share.
I definitely will share some things, but I will say the best resource is finding these young men who are wholehearted and can model it, because it's not something that you can just like say, okay, do this and you're going to, it's a whole way of living. And camp for many of these kids, maybe they grew up at camp and they were transformed through the experience. So they've experienced it. They've experienced that sense of belonging, and then they're able to translate that and teach the other kids. So yes, I will definitely follow up with you and share some things. So Helaina, where can people find all this great stuff? Your go-to statements, your coaching, all that. Where is it available?
So it's all online at tametheteen.com. And also there's my blog and all that. And then if you go to the website, there are the go-to lines. You'll get hit with it right when you're on the website. And I recommend anyone who just needs some like quick, easy ways to break the power struggle cycle that they download those.
Oh, that's what I'm going to do right when I get off from you. I don't know why I hadn't done it yet. I was browsing through your website. It said hadn't taken the time, but I will definitely download those statements, and I'm sure they would be helpful for counselors and for myself as a parent. So Helaina, thank you so much for being on today. It was just a pleasure getting to know you and hearing your wisdom. And I know that my listeners will really appreciate all that you had to share.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing thing that you do. I really, really love your work. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. As always, you can find all the links to things that we discussed in this conversation on my website at sunshine-parenting.com. Search for episode 92. I really enjoy hearing from listeners. So if you have any comments, questions, or feedback about this or any other episode, I'd love for you to drop me a line. You can either send me an email at audrey@sunshine-parenting.com or use the voice recorder that's available on my website at sunshine-parenting.com. For me, the month of June always means one thing, and that's staff training at summer camp. This June, I've had so much fun visiting several camps, training counselors, and helping them prepare for an amazing summer at camp. I believe it's so important to get this message out about connection that the first chapter in my book, Happy Campers, Camp Secret #1 is connection comes first. I'm going to end this episode with a quote from Brené Brown that I use in that chapter. Connection is why we're here. It gives purpose and meaning to our lives.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.